Hi, everyone. Welcome to What's New in Sigma for the month of July 2022. Got some exciting stuff to show you in this session. We're going to cover our guest users, our brand new Snowflake Templates version 2.0, which is going to go hand in hand with data swapping, and then another grab bag of features that are all well worth knowing. We're going to give just a couple, maybe 45 seconds, because I'm seeing a lot more attendees still filing in, but in just a minute or two, we'll get started. All right, I think we are good to go, leveling off around 50 attendees here. So get started. My name is Zack Norton. I'm a technical product marketing manager at Sigma. I'll be your moderator for today. What that means is I'm just going to tee everything up, wrap things up at the end, and I'm also going to be available in the question tab within the GoToWebinar control panel. So any questions that come up, I might field them on the fly, or I will defer to Jon Avrach, who is our Senior Director of Solution Architecture and Evangelism, who's going to be taking you through our latest and greatest new features. But before we get going, I'm just going to launch a poll to learn a little bit more about our audience. Well, we'd like to get an idea of who's in this session so we can actually cater some of the content for our audience. So opening up this poll here. We have the votes coming in. Actually, a pretty diverse audience, it looks like. And I'm going to close that. I'll share the results. And if this is not popping up here, it looks like we have a strong mix of both BI administrators, analysts, and business users. So between the guest user accounts, I think that's going to be more interesting for the administrator folks. The analysts and managers are going to have a good time with our Snowflake templates and data swapping. And our business users, you'll get to find out a lot in terms of just these neat little features that are popping up within the tool that we'll cover in the grab bag section. So I'm going to hide those feature results and a few other little housekeeping items. This is going to be a great session to pay close attention to because of the variety of topics. But if you get up, go for a snack, come back, and you missed the section you were most interested in, don't worry, this is all going to be recorded. You'll get an email after the session, and it's also going to be posted on our website. And feel free to reach back with any questions in the chat. So I'm going to hand it off to Jon Avrach, and he'll walk you through the agenda for today.
All right, thank you, Zach, and welcome everyone to the July What's New in Sigma webinars. For those that are new to the webinar, welcome. We give these webinars about every 1 to 2 months as new features roll out in Sigma. And also welcome back to those people who are some of our regulars I see here in the attendees list. So we have quite a full agenda today. We're going to go over guest users, multiple grouping keys, column descriptions, Snowflake templates, data swapping, and then a whole grab bag of features. There's even some features which are new to the product in the last couple of months, which I'm not even covering here, and you can see in the release notes. And I believe I'm going to give a demo of every single thing that we see up here on the screen. So this is going to be a very interactive session. As Zach mentioned earlier, if you have questions along the way that's relevant to the content that we're presenting today, please do put them in the chat section and we'll do our best to address them while we're on the call. So let's jump right into it. So we have some administrators on the line and then we have quite a bit of analysts and business users on the line, but I think guest users applies to both sides of the house here. And this is a feature that we released to allow external users like your customers to be able to access data that's sitting in your own warehouse, whether it's in Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, or Databricks, Postgres, wherever it sits. You can open up access to that data to your customers. And Sigma really has 2 different ways to do this. One is embedding, which we've talked quite a bit about on some of these recent webinars. And we also have this guest user feature, and I'll explain what some of the differences are there. But the general idea here is that you can, in a very safe manner, allow external users to access Sigma, and they won't even see that the other users even exist, or the other companies even exist here. So I'll show you what that looks like. So why would you want to do this, or what are some of the benefits? The biggest one is you can give customers access to your data. This could be a separate offering that you have. You may charge for this, or it may just be that you want to offer it for competitive reasons or for value add. And I would think of this as kind of like an alternative to embedding. So it really depends if you have a customer portal or not already. Typically, our customers will go with either guest users or embedding. Sometimes they go with both, but usually one or the other if they want to give access to external users. So let's take a look at what guest users look like in the product. Let's jump over here to my screen. And for this, I've already done some setup. I'll just kind of go over what the setup was here. So if you want to create a new guest user, what you would do is you would go over here and you would add your users, and you will see a new option here called guest users, invite as guest user. You'll see there's a little tooltip there about what it does. And all you have to do is check that box, and then this becomes a guest user. One thing to note is that if you make a user a guest user, you can't change it down the road. So this guest user option that you see right here is only available when you are first inviting a user. So if you've already created a user, let's say it was an internal user, and you want to change that user to a guest user, that's not possible. You'd have to create a new user. And the opposite is also not possible. If you create someone as a guest user, you cannot convert them to an internal user. So this only happens at account creation type. And everything else here is pretty typical. You can select the account type. For those not familiar with this feature, it's kind of like a role. It gives them different access to different feature permissions. And one thing to note is that guest users cannot be admin. You will see admin in the list here, but they won't take on any admin privileges. So there's only one type of admin in Sigma, and that's a global admin. So there are no individual guest user admins. And then you would give them a team. And most likely what you'll do is you will create a team, and these are just normal teams. And teams are like groups, for those who are not familiar with teams in Sigma. But what you'll do is you'll create one team per customer. So let's say you have customer 1 you're giving access to, customer 2 you're giving access to. You would have a team for each one of those. You would create all your guest users, and then you can assign multiple guest users at the same customer site to a single team, and then repeat the process for all the rest of the teams. So you would create your users like that, and then you would also create your teams. I'll show you what these guest teams look like here. These are just kind of like normal teams that I've already created here. And when you create a team, you will add a member. You would add your, I've already added it here, so I can't add it again. But if I hadn't added my guest 1 user here, they would show up in the list right here. And you can see that I already have my guest user has been added. And how do you know if someone's a guest user? There is this badge right here that appears next to them. So it'll say that they're a guest user. So now I'm all set up. I have a guest user created. This is their email address over here. And then they are part of the guest team 1. So on the right-hand side, I'm going to flip over to this other browser here. This is an incognito session here. And this user is logged in as a guest user here. So if I look at my profile, I can see that my email address is guest 1 user. So I'm logged in as a different user in this window than I am in the other window. So when I'm logged in as a guest user, it looks quite different. You can see the connections. Right now, I only have access to this sample database connection, whereas in my other window, there are quite a few other connections here. That's one thing that's different. And then when I go into workspaces, and this is where it really gets different, is I'm only going to see the workspace that's that's assigned to me here. And there's currently no documents in here, but if I go into my workspace, and the workspace is just like a shared folder, this gives me the ability for different users of that guest team to share with each other and to do collaboration. I'm going to go over to my documents. So prior to this webinar, I had created a workbook. It's a really simple one, just has a table here. And one of the big differences with guest users is the way sharing and tagging works. So guest users are kind of sandboxed. They cannot see that other teams even exist. Again, team is just synonymous with another customer existing. So what that means is if I take this workbook and I go to share, and I have my box here where I can type in different users, there's only one thing available here. So if I click in here, if I search for other users, I happen to know there's lots of other users on the system. Nothing else appears here. The only thing that's being suggested for sharing is guest team 1. So I'm logged in as a user on guest team 1. I can only see guest team 1 exists. So even though guest team 2 is out there, it doesn't even show up in the sharing dialog. So I'm kind of oblivious to the fact that other customers are even on the system. So that's one big difference in the guest user functionality. Another one is that there's no ability to share with all users. So you don't see the all members there. I'm going to go back over to my other screen here just to show you this. So the window I'm logged into right now is a logged in as an administrator. And if I pull up a document and go to sharing, you'll see it looks very different. I can see tons of users, tons of teams, and I also have the all members. So guest users cannot share with all members because that would really violate the security model there. So that's one big difference. And another one is if I'm doing comments, and for those not familiar, if you have a table or visualization in the workbook and you want to make a comment on there, you can go to this comment feature. And this is like threaded discussions. You can put an @ sign in here and you can tag someone else here. And if I put someone's name like Alfonso in there, he's a user in the system, but it doesn't show up. It's not recommending it. And that's because my guest team here doesn't have visibility to that user. In fact, I only have one user I can tag here, which is myself. So not terribly interesting. You see the guest tag badge there as well. So these are all things that we've done to kind of isolate or sandbox the guest user experience. So if you give your customers access to Sigma through the guest user functionality, you can rest assured that they're only going to see people and teams and documents that they're supposed to have access to. So let's go through a few FAQs here, and then I'll pause at the end and we'll just see if any questions came in around guest users. So quite a few questions here. Why did Sigma create guest users? This is one of the questions I asked myself as well. Like, can't we just get the same functionality by using the standard Sigma permission model? We already have the ability to grant access on workspaces and folders to teams and users. So why do I really need guest users? So the answer is that guest users they're truly isolated. They're sandboxed and they have what I call a locked scope, which means that when you're sharing or you're tagging people, or if you're going to the search box to search for documents or tables, pretty much anything you do in the product which may look for other people or documents existing, that's all locked down and you don't have to worry about it. If you make someone a guest user, they'll be locked into their world. And there's a few other differences. These are outlined in the documentation. I pulled out a few of them of interest here. One of them is that guest users, we also cover the guest user cannot be admin. Guest users cannot request access to documents. So one of the features in Sigma is if you come across a document and you don't have like edit access or explore access, you want to kind of up level your access. There's no way to do that as a guest user. So guest users are pretty tightly controlled by the administrators. And another one, a little more for admins here, but just to be aware of it, is that we do have a very robust API. We did a webinar a couple months ago, which is available on our website, which is all about the Sigma APIs if you're interested in that. guest users cannot use the API. The next question is, my customers want to access Sigma. Should I use embedding or guest users? This is a pretty frequent question that I get. I work with a lot of customers on embedded types of use cases. So they kind of serve similar purposes. They both let you expose Sigma to your customers. So one should use one versus the other. And the simplest way to think about this is if you already have an application that's customer facing, like a customer facing portal where your customers are logging in and doing things with your data right now, you may want to use the embedding option instead of guest users because it'll create a very integrated experience. It basically it'll plug Sigma into your customer application and it'll tie into your existing authentication and you can kind of tie it into your look and feel. But we have some customers that don't have customer-facing portals, but they do want to give access to their customers, and guest users are ideal for that. In that case, the guest users would log directly into Sigma. So how do guest users authenticate? So we have quite a few authentication options in Sigma. A lot of our customers will use an identity provider, like a SAML provider, something like Okta, to do single sign-on. That's pretty common. But for guest users, it's a little bit different. So guest users, they're external users. They wouldn't be typically part of, like if you have a single sign-on system like Okta, you probably don't have your guest users in there because it's for internal purposes. So because of that, the way we decided to design this is that guest users authenticate with password when they're logging into Sigma here. And we also recommend that you use two-factor authentication. So Sigma does have two-factor authentication built into it. It's an option which you can enable in the admin panel. So what does this all look like when you put it together? Oops, I just realized my slides are a little bit out of order here. I apologize for that. So this is what it looks like, different kind of scenarios. So if you have internal and guest users, and internal just regular Sigma users that are part of your company. If you look at options 2 and 5, these are the most likely scenarios when you have internal and external guest users. So scenario 2 says, I'm using my identity provider, like I'll use Okta as an example again for my internal, my corporate users, and then my guest users will authenticate with password plus two-factor authentication. The other scenario is if you're not using single sign-on, if you're just using traditional password authentication for your internal users, scenario 5 would apply to you. You would use password for internal and password for guest using two-factor in both cases. So the main takeaway here is that we do not support using single sign-on for guest users here. That's what options 3 and 4 are. So those are unsupported configs. Okay, so next question is, we talked about this a little bit earlier, is can guest users be admins? So the answer is no here. So guests can only be assigned a non-admin account type. And you can create as many account types as you would like and give different permissions. Like you can say this user can download data, this user can upload data. You can restrict those kind of things and create as many of those account types as you would like to do. Okay, so let me pause there. Zach, just ask you a question. Have you had any questions come in from the audience that we should, around guest users that we should talk about now?
Yeah, we got two really pointed questions, and what you've addressed might already cover some of what they're asking, but I think it's good to knock these out directly. So one user, they use Okta for authentication. So when they use Okta, they're not able to change their team assignment through the Sigma UI. That all happens in Okta and syncs over. So their question is, how would guest team creation work given having Okta enabled and they cannot create teams in the Sigma UI today?
So do you think this question's around like, is there a way to automate the team creation?
So if I already have Okta enabled and I don't have team creation through the UI, but then I enable guest users, how do I create teams for guest users? Is that opened up then alongside the Okta integration, or are they still locked out of creating new teams?
So you would create the teams. You would create the teams through the UI. You could also create them through the API if you want a way to automate it. But the way I would think about it is the guest user functionality is separate from anything that you're doing in your identity provider.
Okay, so they'd be able to use the Okta for governing internal users, but then once they enable guest users for folks coming out outside their organization, they'd be able to still create new teams for them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And the other one was when using Sigma in application embedding with parameterization, can guest user IDs be passed to Snowflake as a parameter? So this is kind of blending guest users with embedding, which I'm not too sure if that's the path we would typically take.
Yeah, you cannot combine. There's three different types of users in Sigma. There's the internal users and the guest users we've been talking about. And then for embedding, we also have an embedding user, which you can optionally pass in through the embedded URL. But when you're doing that, you are using a third type of user, which is the embedded user. So nothing to do with guests there. But I'm not sure if I'm answering the full question there.
Yeah, so I think this kind of goes back to when to use app embedding and when to use guest users, because as far as
Yeah.
we've approached it so far, never the two shall meet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so they kind of achieve the same objective at the end of the day, which is they give access to data to external customers. But if you're using embedding to do it, you will pass in a username and a team in the embedded URL. This is something, if you want to know more about this, it's in our doc, but we also covered it on the webinar around embedding, which I think we did a few months ago. And you can get similar functionality because you still have an embedded user and you have an embedded team. But the difference is with embedding is you pass it in through the embedded URL and it's provisioned on the fly, versus with guest users, it's a little more traditional where you create it ahead of time through the UI or through the API. But they are very different concepts. You cannot have an embedded user use a guest user's credentials, for example. They're not compatible with each other.
Oh, and I'm actually getting feedback from one of our users. It does seem that when SCIM is enabled with an IDP like Okta, then we do not allow guest user accounts to be supported simultaneously, or that's as of the current state of our documentation.
Okay, that is definitely something that I'll need to follow up with offline.
But that is it for questions right now for guest users. I think we're good to move on.
Yeah, but I will take a note of that, and we should take a note of the person that's asking that as well, so we can follow up.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, some of these authentication issues can get quite tricky. You can start combining all these different technologies in the stack. Okay, so let's move to multiple grouping keys. I know we have a lot of analysts and BI users that are watching the webinar. So this one applies to everyone here. And this is a feature which I've been waiting for a long time as well. And it's the ability to group by multiple columns all at one time. And this applies to tables that you're creating in a workbook. So you're accessing some table in a workbook and you want to group by multiple columns in kind of one shot here. So the benefit of this is just a lot more intuitive. There are certain data sets. One which I work with all the time is Salesforce data. I'll show you this one in the demo. It really benefits from multiple grouping keys. So let's have a look right here. Here I have a workbook where I've created. I'm going to pop this into edit mode so we can see what this looks like behind the scenes. This is Salesforce data, and this top table here has multiple grouping keys enabled. And one way you can tell that is if you look in the inspector panel on the left under groupings, the group by has 4 different columns in it. So before this feature existed, if you tried to drag another column up to the grouping list here, it would just replace the column with whatever column was there already. So now instead of replacing it, it's going to add it, and you can have as many of these columns as you want in there in a grouping key. So in this case, we have two different groupings. The first one has 4 columns. The second grouping has 2 columns. And in the case of Salesforce data, this makes a lot of sense because you'll have an account ID, which is a unique identifier for each Salesforce account. But there are other things associated with Salesforce accounts which are also unique. There's like a one-to-one relationship. So what I mean by that is for every account ID, you have a unique account ID, you have one unique account name. It's very unlikely you would have 2 account IDs with the same account name in there. And then you also have some industry associated with it. And then Salesforce also keeps track of like the number of employees that are out there. So these are all grouped together in one chunk, if you will. And then we do the same thing for the owner. We have an owner name here, and we have their title. So we don't need to have the title under a separate grouping. It's just not necessary here. And the way this used to look before we have this feature was the table that you see in the middle here. And the big difference is if you look up on the left-hand side here, there's a lot of different group bys, and each group by only has 1 column in it. So in some sense, it looks like the table at the top, because you see the same columns going across, but you'll see that these thick gray bars are in between each one. This indicates multiple grouping levels, so the separation between grouping levels. You'll also see there's lots of like minus signs here to expand and collapse things. And these are kind of overkill because there's only 1 item in each grouping level. So the expand and collapse doesn't really make sense. But really the biggest functional difference here is, besides for the cleanliness aspect, is things like sorting. So if I go to sort on number of employees here, let's say I sort ascending, you're going to see that this will work just fine. I can change the sorting and everything sorts kind of as I expected. But if I go over here and sort, I'm not going to see that behavior. It just doesn't seem to work the way I expect. Now this is actually working as designed, but it's a little bit nuanced why it works this way. And what's happening on the second chart here is that it is sorting the results, but it's sorting it within the grouping level. In this case, the grouping level is the industry. So if I had multiple values for a number of employees, it would sort it for the industry. And there are a lot of cases where this behavior makes sense. For example, if I have a store region like West and I have a bunch of states in there, I may want to sort each region to see what states have the most sales in it, for example. So that's a case when sorting within grouping levels actually makes sense. But in this case, it doesn't. We used to have a workaround for it. I won't go too much into how I built the workaround down here, but it wasn't very convenient. You had to use like a lot of min and first functions like you see up here in the toolbar. So we did have a workaround, but I think it was pretty cumbersome. So that's what multiple grouping keys allows us to do there. So let's take a look at the FAQs for this. So I thought Sigma already supported this. Why am I talking about this as a new feature? So you're kind of right, we did. So for those that have been around Sigma for a while, you may remember our worksheets product did have this functionality. So this is really a parity feature which we ported over to workbooks here. Before I move on, Zach, any questions on multiple grouping keys?
Nope, no questions in the chat. I'm sure it's one of those features that's more fun to play with to get your head around, but
yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to column descriptions. This one is pretty self-explanatory. It is a description on a column. Simple feature, but incredibly useful because it will tell you information like what is this column all about. So this is something that I've been waiting for myself for a lot of the usage dashboards that I build that go into the product. And one of the cool things about this feature is that it will inherit the column descriptions into all the dependent objects. And I'll show you what that looks like in the demo here. So the benefits of column descriptions are it gives you context. You know what you're looking at. It gives you business meaning. Like you can understand, like if I see gross profit margin, how is it calculated? What does it mean? And it kind of provides like a common language. So let's look at column descriptions here. So what I've done is I have a workbook table up here, the first one called retail dataset. And if you look in the lower left, you'll see it's based on this data set down here. Now in this data set, which is the source, I have defined my column descriptions. Let's just view this data set over here, and we'll pull up the columns link. So someone went through, added the different column descriptions here. Someone who has access to edit the data set. These can also get picked up automatically from the warehouse if you have descriptions defined in your tables. And then when I hover over different columns here, you'll see that there are column descriptions. Now, when I hover over gross profit, there is no column description. That's why it's not showing anything. And then it gives me the text over here. Now, the table down below is based on the table up above. So the way I created the table below is I went here and said create child table. So this table is, the bottom table is linked to the top table. And we inherit the column descriptions. So you'll see the same descriptions there. So there's actually two levels of inheritance. The first table is inheriting from the data set, and then the bottom table is inheriting from the top table. So it's kind of getting passed on down the line. Now, if I wanted to override one of these, I could go in here and add a description. We'll call this a new description. Doesn't change it in the data set, but if I go down here to my dependent one, it now will show it. So anything that's dependent, anything that's downstream will pick up on the new description automatically. If I don't like that, I can hit undo, go back here, and my column descriptions have been restored. One thing you will note is the column descriptions do have a limit of 200 characters, which should be fine for the vast majority of cases. So similar FAQ to before, I thought we already had column descriptions. So similar answer is we have had column descriptions for quite a while in data sets. That's the one I just showed you. And we had it in our previous product of worksheets. So now Workbooks supports column descriptions. Next question is, this seems like a really useful feature. Should I start using it? And absolutely, you should. This is a high demand feature. I know a lot of the customers that I work with on a regular basis have asked for this for quite some time. And it's a really fairly simple way to make it easier for end users to understand what they're looking at. So I do recommend using them. Zach, any questions on column descriptions?
Yeah, well, naturally, now that they're in the table, do they go into the pivot tables yet?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I haven't actually checked that, to be honest.
I checked it. It looks like that's still on the roadmap, but that is a natural progression where we'd want them to show up. So hang on tight, everybody. Put them in the actual tables now, and then we'll start working on getting them in the pivot tables for you. The other feedback was, let's see. We inherit it from the tables within Snowflake, yes? So if I write a SQL query against a table, it would pick it up from Snowflake and have the column descriptions in the worksheet now?
If you have if in your create table statement, like if you're using Snowflake, if you put the column description in Snowflake, we will pick it up. That is correct.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to, we're going to do these kind of together, these next two features. So Snowflake templates and data swapping, in some ways they go hand in hand. And you may have heard about Snowflake templates inside Sigma before. This is kind of like a V2. We had these templates with dashboards a while ago. Now we have them available with workbooks. And I'm going to show you some of the templates which exist today, and then a sneak preview of some templates which are coming out really soon. So what are Snowflake templates, and what are templates in general? So these are out-of-the-box workbooks that Sigma provides. We have people internally that are creating these, and they'll give you a lot of really useful information. So this is specific to people that are using Snowflake as their backend, and it'll provide metrics like Snowflake compute costs, storage costs like credit consumption, Snowflake performance, and then like user activity, top users, which users are doing the most things. And they're workbooks behind the scenes. You launch them as part of a template section, And then the great thing about this is that you can customize these and make them your own. So they're a really good starting point for doing like management of Snowflake. And this gives you a lot of visibility into Snowflake to monitor costs. But I think one of the greatest things about these is that they are customizable. You won't break anything by customizing because you can always spin up an original template as well. And then data swapping is it's a separate feature in and of itself, which is useful outside of templates, but we released it alongside of the templates because templates require it. And the idea of data swapping is when you first open up one of these templates, which is really just a workbook, we have some sample data in there. So you can browse the template, even if you're not a Snowflake customer, you could still open up the Snowflake templates and see what they're all about. Or if you don't have the ability, if you have like a sample or a trial account and you haven't defined the Snowflake connection yet, you can still get access to the templates. Data swapping allows you to repoint the template to your Snowflake instance to see your own data in there. So I'll show you what this looks like. But data swapping can also be used in other contexts, even if you're not using templates. If you have just a regular workbook and you want to change the source that the workbook's using, you want to kind of rewire all the data sources in your workbook, you can do that with data swapping. So if you have like a dev database or a different connection, you can take the workbook, use swap now, and remap everything in one shot to another database for another connection. So really nice feature for development and kind of prototyping there. So let's take a look at some of the templates here. So if we go into the template section, we will see these things called Sigma provided templates. You may see other templates on there if you have an existing system with someone's name on it. Things that say Sigma templates are ones which Sigma creates and then publishes to the general customer base here. And you'll see lots of them that have the word Snowflake in front of it. So we'll open up Snowflake compute cost first. You'll see at the top the swap now option appears. We'll get back to that in just 1 second. But what this compute cost template will show is everything you ever wanted to know about how my credit consumption in Snowflake is going. So you can see how much compute credits in dollars have I consumed at a per warehouse level. I can see it across time down here, and I get heat maps so I can see like which time of day or which day of the week is incurring the most cost. And you'll see these are all in dollar amounts. And what's happening here is we have a parameter at the very top where you can input your cost per credit. So if you were to change this and say, well, my credits actually cost $4.10, you put that in there and everything will get recomputed right there. Now, when you first open this up, this is just showing our own sample data. You may look at this and say, well, this doesn't apply to me. And that's why we have these swap sources. So if I go back into edit mode, I can choose swap data sources here. And this is a very robust UI where I can repoint it to another connection table or schema here. Automatically, Sigma is going to do a best effort at detecting where you can swap to. That's what this replace with is here. It's automatically detected it. It said it matched 7 of 7 columns. These are all the dependencies in the template. And most of the time, you can just hit swap here. I'll do that in a second. But let me show you, if you wanted to manually change it, you could choose any one of your other connections here. And it's looking for the warehouse metering history table. You could go down here and find it, and you could manually select the table here. So we allow you to manually swap sources, but most of the time you can just open up swap sources, hit swap, and now it's going to wholesale rewire the entire workbook to point to my own Snowflake instance. And now this is showing me my real data. That was a little too fast. I'll just play this back for you. I'm going to hit undo. This is using the sample data. This is how it is when you first open it. And if I hit redo, you'll see it's totally different. So now it's applying it to my own warehouse. It's not applying it to the sample data anymore. And you can save this off. You can save off different copies that are each pointing to different accounts if you have multiple Snowflake accounts. So that's a quick look at swapping data sources in one of the templates. Another one of the templates we have out there is around performance monitoring. Here you can see a performance over time. This is more for admins. You can see like compilation time, execution time. You can get query trends. You can see histograms on here. You can look at it on like a week over week basis or month over month basis. There's a ton of options in here. So you can see how your performance is changing over time. And this is based on the individual query level. So you can even do like, we'll show you scatter plots. So you can see, you can identify individual queries, which may be taking longer than other ones. So really quite detailed. And the next thing I want to show you here is a sneak preview of what's coming very soon. And what we're going to do is we're constantly improving these templates. We're going to take some of these templates and combine them into one. So right now, if you were to go to the template section, you would see there's a compute cost template, there's a reader cost, and there's a storage cost. These are for Snowflake reader users. Snowflake storage cost is how much is my storage costing me. We're going to combine these all into one template, so it's a little bit simpler. And we're going to call it the Snowflake cost monitoring. So it's kind of similar to what you just saw before, but we're going to package it all into one. So if you look at the bottom, you'll see there's tabs for cost and storage. They're all kind of combined into one area. That's one change which is coming in this template. Another big one is that parameter box for inputting your credit amount. You don't see that anymore. So we're gonna do away with that box, and instead we're gonna automatically pick it up from the contract tables that Snowflake provides. So this will make the usability just a little bit easier. You won't have to put your credit number in there. You'll open this thing up. You'll swap data sources to your own Snowflake instance, and the dollar amounts will just automatically be correct out of the box. And the last template I want to show is the contract monitoring one. So if you have a lot of different Snowflake accounts, this one is for you. And this is going to show you across all the different accounts how my contract is doing. I think the one that I think is the best chart in all of this is this contract burn down right here. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over some of the other things, but you'll see there's an orange line and a blue line. And up here, it very clearly explains what these things mean. So if the orange line is above the blue line, what this means is that the credits will not run out before the contract ends. So basically what we're looking at here is how much time is left in the contract in days and how many credits are left in the contract. And we can plot these two side by side, and we can see that when my contract gets to the end, I'm going to have 89% of my balance left over, but 83% of the days left here. So what this means is that we may have some additional credits that are going to be outstanding. So we might want to use up more credits, is what that's telling me here. Zach, in the interest of time here, since we're running a little bit short, I am going to just go through. Yeah, I'm just gonna go through the rest of the content here, so make sure we get through all of our grab back stuff here. So do I need to use the data swapping when I open a template? So this kind of depends. We have different kinds of templates. If you're opening up a template which is going against a well-known application like Snowflake or Salesforce, then we're going to open it up with sample data. You're going to want to switch it to your own Salesforce or Snowflake data. Otherwise, it's not very actionable for you. But there are other kinds of templates out there that we provide that are more like example analysis, like period-over-period analysis, one of our templates. This one, you don't want to swap it with your own data because it's built on top of our own sample data. So that's when you would use the different, that's when you would use the data swapping feature. Okay, so we got about 15 minutes left here. We do have 6 different features that I want to show you right here. So let's move over into our workbook and go through our grab bag now, one of my favorite sections where we just cover off a whole bunch of features really rapidly here. So I've got my demo workbook here. So we covered off grouping keys. We covered off the column descriptions already. So now we're going to move on to buttons. So when you're building a workbook, you can add buttons. You can also add images. They provide similar kinds of functionality. And the new feature that we just added here is you can have a button take a different kind of action. A button can now go to another workbook page. So if I click on grouping keys, it's going to take me to the grouping page. If you look down here at the bottom, you'll see these pages will change when I click on the buttons. So if I go back to buttons, click on column descriptions, it takes me to the column description page. Likewise, you could do the same thing for an image. So same exact kind of functionality. And the way this is set up is you would go to add a new object. You can either add like a button over here, or you can add an image. And if you add a button, there is a new action type. So we previously had 3 of these actions. Now we just added a new one called target on this workbook. And then you can select where it targets. So you can have it go to the page itself. That's what top of page means. You can even have it go to an individual tile on the page. So if you have a really big workbook with lots of visits on there, maybe it's at the bottom, you can have the button kind of fast forward to the bottom of that workbook there. And this will also work in embedding. It's one of the reasons why we built this, is that our embedded customers wanted to have ways to go from page to page in there. So that is our button page to page navigation. Next feature in the grab bag is double click to drill. So Sigma has a really nice drill anywhere model, which we've had for a long time, where you could right click on something like a bar here, and you could go to drill down, and then you could select a column to drill down on. So that we've already had for a while. The new functionality here is there's another way to get to it. We have a lot of customers that have been trying to double click on bars or double click on pies to drill down. So now that it works, you can't see me doing this, but I'm going to double click on this bar right there. And what it does is it brings up the drill down menu. So I really like this. It gives you a second way to access the same functionality. It's pretty intuitive. A lot of products support double click for drill down. So now we could drill down to, let's say, store name, and there's our drill down. I'll just say Command Z there to undo that. Pretty straightforward. It just works automatically out of the box. I'm gonna skip to filter UI, then we'll get back to this date grain one in a second. So the filter UI, let's go into edit mode, just get the full experience here. So Sigma supports 2 kinds of filters on workbooks. One is at the individual viz level, like for a bar chart or for a table, you can have a local filter on it. You can also have what we call a page level filter. So example, a page level filter is what we saw here on one of the Snowflake contracts. This is a page control, and this also acts as a filter. The change that we're talking about here are for filters that are on the individual viz. So when I'm in edit mode and I click on one of these tiles, if you've been using Sigma for a few months, let's say, or longer, you may remember if you had a filter on one of these elements and you clicked on the element, the filter would appear at the top of the screen, and it would also be a little bit jumpy. The viz would move down to make way for the filter. And the experience was, I would say, not great because things were moving around in the UI a lot. So what we've done is we've moved the filter into the bar over here on the right. So you'll see this new filter icon appears. The number next to it is telling me that I have 3 filters on this viz. And then I click on those filters, see what they are. And another great thing about this is it's now a floating dialog. Seems like a really basic thing, but if you've used workbooks a lot, you will recognize this is going to improve the filter experience a lot, because one, you click on the tile, things are not going to jump around on you. We're not going to hide your filters, and also we're not going to hide your data. So if this box is hiding something, you can just move it over and see your actual data. So I've been using this for the last month or so, and I found it just to be a lot more usable interface for doing filters. Okay, so let's jump over to this date grain and see what this is all about. So one of the really common things, use cases that customers ask me a lot is, can I have a chart or a table where I change the grouping time series from week to month to quarter to year? And we've been able to do this for a long time. I've been at Sigma for 2.5 years. We've been able to do this the entire time I've been here. But it's now a lot easier to do this. So let me show you what the end user functionality looks like. Here I am changing it. You can see the table, it's changing the grain. Now it's at the quarter level. If I change it to year, I just see a few bars and a few rows here. So we've had this capability for a while, but the way we're doing it is very different now. So generally the way we change date grains in Sigma is we have a couple different functions here. We have the date trunk function, and the other one is the date part functions. And these two functions take two pieces of input. One is the actual date column, and the second one is the grain. And what you can do here is you can pass in a value like month or day or week or quarter. But before this feature existed, there was no way to put a parameter in here. You had to hardwire the value, like a little string like day or month or week in there. And this required you to write like if then else statements, and it was a little bit clunky and it wasn't very obvious to people. So what we can do now is we can put a parameter in there for the value of week, month, or whatever it is. And this date grain box that I've created with these different values in here is created as a parameter. It's a list element. And then I've manually created these values of week, month, quarter, year. And then I give it a name. I call this thing P_date grain. And now whatever I select here in my dropdown, if I select month, then P_date grain, the parameter, gets set to month. And then that gets passed into the date trunk function up here. So this becomes month. And this makes it really easy to add new grains here. It also makes it easier if I'm passing it into multiple elements in the same workbook. So that's the date grain parameterization. If you're using this kind of switching of grains, which a lot of our customers do, you will find this feature to be a real time saver and just easier to manage in general. Okay, next one in the grab bag here is the underlying data. So I'm going to go back in as an explorer, and we've had the ability to download data for quite some time. If I go to download and I say download this to Google Sheets, this is a chart here. What you're going to see is it's just going to download the aggregate data here. So this is exactly what my bar chart is showing me. But a lot of people said, hey, it would be great if I could download the underlying data. And you can also see the underlying data when you maximize it. You'll see the data appear here. So people said, how can I download the underlying data? And the answer is you can now go to this new menu option we added called underlying data. And you could say, let's download this as we'll say to download this as a CSV. This one, the underlying row count is 21,000 rows. It's been aggregated into 5 bars here. And then if I open up this CSV file, this is opening up in Sheets over here. And if I go to the very bottom of this, I can't zoom in on this, but if you look at this green area here, it says 21364, which includes the column header, which is +1, which matches my row count of 21363. So I've just downloaded the underlying data for that. And this feature is also available when you maximize it. You also have to download underlying data here as well. So this was a feature that people had asked for, particularly useful if you're embedding a single visualization. You want people to be able to download the data. Okay, last thing in the grab bag is there is a new usage dashboard out around materializations. So this is more for administrators. You also notice we reorganized the usage dashboard, so it's a little easier to find things now. We keep creating the usage dashboards. We created scheduled exports a few months ago, and now we have one around materializations. So if you are doing a lot of dataset materialization, this usage dashboard is for you. So I use this all the time on our own demo system because we have lots of materializations that are happening all the time. And I want to know which data sets are using up a lot of compute time, which ones are taking a long time to compute. So this one shows me a stack rank for the last 14 days of how long different data sets are taking to compute, how many times they've materialized, average materialization time, and this will show you every single materialization. So if we go into this retail data set and expand this one, we can see this data set was created by Brendan. He created it this time. This is when it was last materialized. In the last 14 days, it's materialized 16 times. It's failed 0 times. Lots of stats on the materialization. If I scroll over to the right here, you can see every single materialization with the number of rows, number of bytes. You can see how long it took, when it happened, lots of interesting stats. And then you can see like by time of day, by day of week, where the most materialization is happening, where the most failure is happening. And all of this data, because it's an embedded workbook, you can also interact with it. So if you wanted to say, I just want to see the failures, these are in explore mode, you can right click, say, just show me where things have failed in the last 14 days. You'll even get like error messages over here. So that was a quick whirlwind, but I think we covered off all the different things. Button navigation, just show the materialization, double click drill, the date trunk parameterization, filter new UI, and the underlying data. So let's just wrap this up. So Zach, let me just toss over to you to see for closing remarks here.
Yes, let me just see where we are at the slides. All right, so this session was recorded. Try to knock out as many questions as we could go, but this was fully loaded as it gets. Any other follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me. My address is zach@sigmacomputing.com, and some of you guys are going really deep in terms of taking these new features and driving them to the next level. So those are always worth conversations with your customer success engineer or your Sigma solution engineer. And if, John, if you go to another thing is our handouts. There's our July 22 What's New Resources PDF, and if we go to what's coming up next, a lot of these questions could also be addressed in our Sigma user meetup. That's Thursday, August 11th. We have another What's New webinar that's going to be at the end of August 25th. And in between those events, actually in between now and that Sigma user up, is another virtual hands-on lab webinar. The support tab is always open as well. The bottom right-hand corner of your Sigma trial or a Sigma live instance, that question mark will reach out to our support engineers. And I think that about wraps it for this session. Any closing remarks, John?
No, I appreciate everyone's questions. I know we have one follow-up question on SCIM, which we'll get to. But thank you all for joining.
All right, thank you, everybody. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.